Christian soldiers marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Christ the royal master leads against the foe. Forward into battle, see his banners go. Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Oh, for a faith that will not shrink, though pressed by every foe, that will not tremble on the brink of any earthly woe, that will not murmur or complain beneath a chastening rod, but in the hour of grief or pain will lean upon its God. A faith that shines more bright and clear when tempest rage without, that when in danger knows no fear, in darkness feels no doubt. Lord, give us such a faith as this, and then whate'er may come, we'll taste and hear the hallowed bliss of an eternal home. A charge to keep I have, a God to glorify, a never dying soul to save, and fit it for the sky, to serve the present age, my calling to fulfill. Oh, may it all my powers engage to do my Master's will. Arm me with jealous care, as in thy sight to live, and O thy servant, Lord, prepare a strict account to give. Help me to watch and pray, and on thyself rely, assured if I my trust betray, I shall forever die. Rise up, O man of God, have done with lesser things, give heart and mind and soul and strength to serve the King of Kings. Rise up, O man of God, his kingdom tarries long. Bring in the day of brotherhood and end the night of wrong. Rise up, O man of God, the church for you doth wait, her strength unequal to her task. Rise up and make her great. Lift high the cross of Christ, tread where his feet have trod, as brothers of the Son of Man, rise up, O men of God.
Good evening to you all and welcome. This is our class on the book of Romans. This is going to be our fifth class. Sam is here. Hello, Sam. He says, okay, I'm here. You're going to aid me in my worship as a preaching, so this is my Sunday. Great. Glad to be of service. So if you would, in a few minutes here, we're going to be back in the book of Romans, and we will be in Romans 2, starting in verse 17. Romans 2, starting in verse 17. Alright, well, I was gonna give a little bit of time here. Is everybody doing alright? Alright, well, we got 4 in. Good. Hi, y'all. That's O'Shea with the Screaming Goats. I'm here. Hi, y'all. Good to see you, Reba. Alright, we got a couple more folks joining, so I guess we'll get started. And let me change my camera here. Why? Hello? Give me just a second here. OBS just updated and now it won't show the virtual camera. And go. Do you all see the OBS symbol, or are you seeing the PowerPoint?
Yeah, we got your OBS symbol, no PowerPoints or anything.
Why? Okay, well, I'll have to figure that out later. I guess I'll have to share it the old-fashioned way then. Sorry about that. I just updated OBS, and I started the virtual camera and it's not showing up. So we'll just do it this way.
You like my banner?
Yes. Okay. So like I said, we're going to be in Romans tonight, and you can switch back and forth between these two if you want, O'Shea. When you can. We are going to be in lesson 5. And just as a quick recap, we see that in chapter 1 he's dealt with the end of chapter 1, the unrighteous Jews. The ungodly people of their day who suppress the truth and all unrighteousness. And then in chapter 2, he says, now you Jews are inexcusable because you have you have passed he, he says in chapter 2, you Jews should not be passing judgment and doing the same things that these ungodly people are doing. That's the problem. And he says in verse 3, do you suppose, O man, you who judge those who practice such things and do them yourselves, that you will escape the judgments of God? They're not going to escape judgment, they're going to be judged as well. And he goes on to say that he's going to take care of the Gentiles. Don't be pointing the fingers at these ungodly people while you're doing the same thing. We talked about that last time. And so as we get into this chapter now, we're going to look at verses 17 through 20. Verses 17 through 20. Do you want to read that? Or do you want to show that, O'Shea? And if you want, you could read that to preserve my voice a little bit.
Read what through what? 17 through.
17 through 20.
Alrighty. Suppose I can help out a bit.
Alright.
But if thou bearest the name of a Jew, and restest upon the law, and gloriest in God, and knowest his full will, and approvest the things that are excellent, being instructed out of the law, and art confident that thou thyself art a guide of the blind, a light of them that are in darkness, a corrector of the foolish, a teacher of babes, having in the law the form of knowledge and of the truth.
Oh, okay. And we're going to continue there in just a minute. But he says, if you are a Jew living right, will you not want to help others if you rely on God? Verse 17. But if you call yourself a Jew and rely on the law and boast in God, if you boast in God, if you rely on the law, I got those backwards. If you know what is excellent, in verse 18, the Jews knew what was good. The Jews knew what was approved by God. I'm back over here on my PowerPoint. Can you show that again? Okay. Paul says, you Jews, if you rely on the law, boast in God, if you know what is excellent, if you show yourself a guide to the blind, they are saying we've done all these things, and it goes on to say in verse 18, if the Jews know his will and approve what is excellent, because you are instructed from the law And if you are sure that you yourself are guide to those who are blind, a light to those who are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of children, having in the law the embodiment of knowledge and truth. You then who teach others, do you not teach yourself? If you have all these credentials, you're God's people, you boast in God, you rely on the law, you are to be a light to the darkness. Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing, Paul says? No, notice, you then who teach others, do you teach yourself? Well, you preach against stealing. Do you steal? The Jews were harder than the Gentiles for what they were doing, but they were doing the very same things that the Jews would get. Sorry. The Jews were doing the very same things that they would condemn the Gentiles for. That's been Paul's whole point in chapter 2. Jews and Gentiles are no better. Are you practicing what you preach? If you abhor idols, temples, if you teach against that, are you robbing temples? No, notice, he says, verse 22, you who say that one must not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? Do you commit adultery? Or are you practicing what you're teaching here? You who uphold the law, claim you uphold the law, and the Jews were so hard about that on other people, and they love to enforce that on other people. Paul says, how are you doing? Are you measuring up? Do you commit adultery? Notice what it says. You who say that one must not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? Notice what he says next. You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? Do you hold on to idols? You who say we're God's people, we wouldn't be caught dead in a temple. How are you doing with your own idols? Do you actually have idols in your home? Doing these things would make them hypocritical. You gotta live right. Verse 23, you who boast in the law, dishonor God by breaking the law. The very thing that the Jews boasted in was the law of Moses. Paul says the very thing they boasted and gloated over the Gentiles heads was the law, and they broke the law. Do you now break the law? Do you see how ridiculous this is? Do you see how hypocritical this is? This reminds me of the Pharisees in Matthew 15, who outwardly was doing all these things for God, paying tithes and adding extra rules to keep themselves holy. But notice what Jesus says in Matthew 15:4-9. They were neglecting something. Just like the Jews are neglecting something here. They're being hypocritical. Matthew 15:4-9. For God commanded, saying, Honor thy father and mother. He that curse the father and mother, let him die the death. But ye say, whoever shall say to his father or his mother, It is a gift, by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me, and honors not his father and mother, he shall be free. Thus have ye made the commandment of God of none effect by your tradition. Ye hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you, saying, This people draweth nigh unto me with their mouth, and honoureth me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain they do worship me, teaching the doctrine and commandments of men. This is the same attitude Paul is getting after the Jews about. Just lip service, their heart's not in it. They're not actually practicing what they claim to preach. The laws that the Gentiles are breaking, that they're not even keeping that standard themselves. Mark 7:7-9. Howbeit, in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrine and commandments of men, for laying aside the commandments of God, ye hold the tradition of men as the washing of pots and cups, and many other such things ye do, and said unto them, full well, you reject the commandments of God, that ye may keep your own tradition. Same things happening. The Jews are wanting to be right, so right, that they're missing the mark, that they're being hypocritical, that they're saying we boast in God, we rely on the law, but they're doing things contrary to the law of Moses, and they're just as bad as the Gentiles. I see your comment, Sam. Let me read this one verse, make this one point, and then I'll open it up and read your comments. Notice, you who boast in the law, 1 Corinthians 8:1-2. Now as touching things offered unto idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffeth up, but charity edifieth. And if any man think that he knoweth anything, he knoweth nothing yet as he ought to know. They were being puffed up. They're boasting in the law. We're children of Abraham. And Paul's going to go on to address this in this book. But they're not even keeping the same standard. Why are you committing adultery when you say you hold to the commandment of not committing adultery? Why are you holding idols? Why are you breaking the law? And so this is what Paul's dealing with here in this section. Okay. one time the Pharisees, oftentimes the Pharisees, you say, but Jesus came back, but it is written, that's right. They were more interested in their father's tradition, that's right, Sam. They never could keep the law perfect, yet ask others to. That's right, that's the point that Paul's getting at. You are supposed to be a light, a guide to the blind. You who boast in the law, you're not doing things perfect either. You're not practicing what you preach. Any thoughts and comments on those verses 17 through really 22? Okay. And so let's look at this. Well, let's move on then.
I'm back.
Okay. And so verses. Well, we didn't go over verse 24. Verse 24 says, "For as it is written, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you." How could that be? Well, they're not keeping the covenant. And that reflects poorly on their God. It's blasphemed because of you. The Gentiles are looking, and it's not enticing to them to have this relationship with God. The name of the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. Wouldn't that be an awful thing to have said of us? If we do not practice what we preach, the name of God will be blasphemed because of you and I. That's a scary thought. Now he's going to talk about verses 25 through 29 that circumcision avails nothing. And if O'Shea wants to come back in, he can read verses 25 through 29.
25 through 29.
Yes.
Alrighty. For circumcision indeed profiteth, if thou be a doer of the law. But if thou be a transgressor of the law, thy circumcision is become uncircumcision. If therefore the uncircumcision keep the ordinances of the law, shall not his uncircumcision be reckoned for circumcision? And shall not the uncircumcision, which is by nature, if it fulfill the law, judge thee, who with the letter and circumcision art a transgressor of the law? For he is not a Jew who is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, not in the letter, whose praise is not of men, but of God.
All right, thank you.
Alrighty.
And so Paul starts the section by saying, circumcision only benefits you if you keep the law, which the Jews were not keeping the law. So circumcision is not a benefit. Notice what he says in the beginning in verse 25. For circumcision indeed is of value if you obey the law. Well, he just established the fact that they were being hypocritical in their judgment. That means their circumcision isn't valid because they are not keeping the law. Paul just made that case. And he says in the latter half of that verse, circumcision benefits those who keep the law, but if you do not keep the law, circumcision profits you nothing. If you're going to get a sign of the covenant, and not keep the covenant anyways, well, there's no advantage. Notice this. If you obey, but if you break the law, verse 25, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. You Jews are no different than the uncircumcised if you're not going to keep your covenant. Your circumcision doesn't profit for anything. Now, he asked a question in verse 26. So if a man who is uncircumcised keeps the precepts of the law, will not his uncircumcision be regarded as circumcision? He is keeping the law. He is more a Jew than you are. Notice, if a man keeps the law without circumcision, is he justified? That's his point, right? Will not his uncircumcision be regarded as circumcision? He's practically a part of the covenant. He's keeping the law better than you circumcised Jews. And then notice what he says. Doesn't this fact shed a bad light on y'all? Now, notice verse 26. Again. So if a man who is uncircumcised keeps the precepts of the law, will not his uncircumcision be regarded as circumcision? Then he who is physically uncircumcised but keeps the law will condemn you. You're going to be condemned because he is keeping your law even better than you are. And that's just ridiculous. You are God's holy, special people. Notice verse 27 again. Then he who is physically uncircumcised but keeps the law will condemn you who have the written code and circumcision but break the law. This uncircumcised individual who's keeping the law condemns the person who has the law. It's ridiculous. And notice verse 28. Here's Paul's point. Circumcision of the heart matters, not the circumcision of the flesh. Notice verse 28 again. For no one is a Jew who is merely one outwardly. It doesn't matter if you're just professing Judaism, Paul says, and physical, but a Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the letter. His praise is not from man, but from God. Notice, circumcision is a matter of the heart now. Well, when does this circumcision take place? Colossians 2, we get issued into the covenant in Colossians 2:10 through 12. And Paul is illustrating, he does all this to illustrate his point that he made in verses 22 through 24, which is the Jews were being hypocritical, that they would say, don't steal, you're going to hell if you steal, but they would turn around and steal. And his point is, it doesn't matter if you're outwardly a Jew, it matters the heart. That his point is verse 27, then he who is physically uncircumcised but keeps the law will condemn you who have the written code and uncircumcision but break the law. For no one is a Jew who is merely one outwardly, nor is circumcision outward and physical. But a Jew is one inwardly. It doesn't matter if you were born into it. It matters if you keep the law. This is illustrating the point. You can't just the Jews can't just lord the fact that they're in a covenant relationship over the Gentiles anymore. That they have to keep the heart is what matters, not the physical fact that there's a Jew. That is Paul's point here. And that will take us to the end of verse 20. The end of chapter 2. Before we get into chapter 3, hi Levi. Before we get into chapter 3, let's go into some comments here. On idle, Psalm 135, 15 through 18. Can you pull that up for me? O'Shea? That's right, Sam. It matters that you put away the old self and the old man. That's right. Physical circumcision doesn't matter if you're going to be corrupt anyway. Go ahead and read that for me, O'Shea.
Alrighty. Psalms 135, 15 through 19, or 18. The idols of the nations are silver and gold, the work of men's hands. They have mouths, but they speak not. Eyes have they, but they see not. They have ears, but they hear not. Neither is there any breath in their mouths. They that make them shall be like unto them, yea, every one that trusteth in them.
Right. That's right, Sam. He's building that point up. It starts here at the end of chapter 2 and goes into chapter 3, and the example comes in chapter 4. Chapters 1 through 4 really go together. The end of chapter 1, he sets up the bad examples of the outsiders. Chapter 2, he says, but you're no better. And here's why. Colossians chapter 2 covers that, right? That's right. It matters that they put away the old self and the old man. Right. It's the circumcision of the heart that matters. There needs to be there needs to be an inward transformation, is what Paul's point is. Any other comments or questions on chapter 2 before we move on into chapter 3? Paul is writing to the church at Rome. Christians. And the whole purpose of Romans is to marry this idea of Jews and Gentiles are now in one body. How do we deal with that? And Paul is building his case for that, and actually he's going to say in chapter 3, are we better than they? Romans 3 will show that, and how it's done you will cover. Okay, then how would this chapter, what? Quit CJ time. This chapter would apply to his recipients in that they would begin to understand that the Jew has no advantage over the Gentile anymore. They had an advantage. He's going to say that at the beginning of this chapter, but they don't have any more advantage. They're all one in Christ. That's what this letter's about. I don't know what you're getting at there, Levi. Chapter 2 is about how the Jews have no advantage over the Gentiles. It's not the circumcision of the flesh that matters, it's the circumcision of the heart, and that's what he's introducing really before we get into chapter 3. Yes. We know that they would have been because of Acts chapter 2 and verse 10. And he is talking to Jewish Christians here. Okay, well, I'm gonna try and move on into chapter 3 then. So let's read chapter 3 and verses 1 through 8.
Read 3, 1 through 8.
Yep.
Alrighty. Are you ready? What advantage, then, hath the Jew? Or what is the profit of circumcision? Much every way. First of all, that they were entrusted with the oracles of God. For what if some were without faith? Shall their want of faith make of none effect the faithfulness of God? God forbid, yea, let God be found true, but every man a liar, as it is written, Thou that mightest be justified in thy words, and mightest prevail when thou comest into judgment. But if our unrighteousness commendeth the righteousness of God, what shall we say? Is God unrighteous, who visiteth with wrath? I speak after the manner of men. God forbid. For then how shall God judge the world? But if the truth of God through my lie aboundeth unto his glory, why am I also still judged as a sinner? And why not, as we were slanderously reported, and as some affirm that we say, let us do evil that good may come, whose condemnation is just.
Sam says they saw that they had more right in God's and than God's people, but Paul expresses how the gospel is for Gentiles too by faith. That's right. That's the case he builds in chapter 2 and continues to build in chapter 3. But in the beginning of chapter 3, Paul lists some advantages to being a Jew. He asks, what advantage has the Jew over the Gentile? And long story short, much advantage. Well, look at what he says. Or what advantage has the Jew, or what is the value of circumcision? To begin with, the Jews were first entrusted with the oracles of God, weren't they? In verse 2, he says that. And notice the order back in chapter 1, Romans 1:16 and 17. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of God to salvation to the Jew first and also to the Greek. And we can read about the startings of this covenant way back in Exodus 19 and 20. And if we turn over to Deuteronomy 5:2 through 3, we see that this was an exclusive relationship and an exclusive covenant. Could you go over to Deuteronomy 5, 2 through 3? we're gonna get we'll we'll get to your question here at the end of this, Levi, but I want to get through my section here.
Where did you want me to head with that? Judges something, was it?
Deuteronomy 5, 2, and 3.
I was listening to Dad.
Did I teach something incorrect back there in chapter 2?
I guess we'll address that at the end of this.
Okay. Notice, Jehovah God made a covenant with us in Horeb. Jehovah made not the covenant with our fathers, but with us, even us who are all of us here alive this day. So what advantage does the Jew have over the Gentile? They were first entrusted. This was a exclusive covenant. God made this covenant with the Jews, not the Gentiles. Notice verses 3 and 4. God was faithful to them, even though they were faithless at times. Notice this, verse 3. What if some were unfaithful? Does their faithlessness nullify the faithfulness of God? No means. But let God be true, though everyone were a liar, as it is written, that you may be justified in your words and prevail when you are judged. God was faithful to Israel even when they were unfaithful to Him. God was faithful to the Jews. And we see a few examples. I just picked out two here, but we see this in the wilderness wanderings when God would lead the Jews through the wilderness, and that He basically fed them when they were ungrateful. And then the Judges time period. How many times did the Jews rebel? And God would send up a judge. And we could give all sorts of examples of God's faithfulness. If the Jews' unrighteousness shows the righteousness of God, is God the cause of unrighteousness for afflicting the Jews? That's the question Paul asks in verse 5. But if our unrighteousness serves to show the unrighteousness of God, what shall we say? That God is unrighteous to inflict wrath on us? I speak in a human way. By no means. Whoops, did I? Before I get to the answer to that, I did have a couple of notes. Because the Jews have the law, they had some responsibilities that came from that. After all, Psalm 119, 105 says, Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Ezekiel 3:17-19. Son of man, I have made thee a watchman unto the house of Israel. Therefore, hear the word of my mouth and give them warning from me. When I say unto the wicked, Thou shalt surely die, and thou givest them not warning, nor speakest to warn the wicked from his wicked way to save his life, the same wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at thine hand. Yet if thou warn the wicked, and he turn not from his wickedness, nor from his wicked way, he shall die in iniquity, but thou hast delivered his soul. Notice the condemning in Ezekiel's day. The condemnation was going to come to Ezekiel if they perished without warning. And there was always a warning. The Jews had responsibilities when they got the message of judgment. They would still be responsible for their actions, but the prophet would be judged if he refused to relay God's message on them. And so we see the answer. By no means in verse 6. By no means. For then how, if our righteousness is reflected of God's righteousness, how could God judge anybody? He couldn't, right? That wouldn't be just. In verse 7 it says, But if through my lie God's truth abounds to his glory, why am I still being condemned as sinner? If Paul's unrighteous line actually benefits the truth, why is he condemned? He wouldn't be condemned. That would actually be a benefit of God's character based on this thinking. And then he says in verse 8, why not do evil so that good may come? If God's just going to, he says, why do evil that good may come? And if our unrighteousness is reflected of God's righteousness, why not just display our unrighteousness so that God can display his favor? Why not do evil so that good may come? Kind of the idea that we're going to see in chapter 6. So we continue in sin that grace may abound. Because if our unrighteousness shows the righteousness of God, why not just be unrighteous all the time? This is something that we learn from the end of verse 8 that Paul was being accused of. Notice, and why not do evil that good may come, as some people slanderously charge us with saying their condemnation is just. But why why not do bad to multiply the good? If it's going to just reflect God's righteousness, that's Paul's point here in these first 8 verses. And this was something he had to address because he was being accused of. That's all I have for this week. Is there any questions or comments through verse 8 of chapter 3? Okay, so it's time to think critically regarding to how this applies to them. What were they doing that requires Paul to expound on this point? Well, they were judging unrighteously, weren't they? That's Paul's point. They were pointing the finger at the Gentiles, saying how wicked they are. That's why chapter 2 starts out with, "Therefore you are inexcusable." They may be bad, chapter 1. The ungodly people may be bad. How much more? Excuse me, I keep saying chapter 1 is Gentiles. Chapter 1 is just ungodly people. These ungodly people are bad. You are inexcusable, chapter 2 and verse 1. In that you have the oracles of God, chapter 3 and verse 1. But the point in chapter 2 is that they were hypocritically judging the Gentiles for what they themselves were doing. That's Paul's point. In passing judgment, verse 1, for in passing judgment on one another you condemn yourself, because you, the judge, practice the very same things. The Jews were judging others for the very same things that they were doing. So that's why chapter 2 is in there, to set the Jews straight. And he says in verse 3, "Are you supposing by you standing there wagging your finger, you're going to escape the judgment? No. Clean up your life. Clean up what's going on here." Okay. What were they doing that? Excuse me, written to Jewish Christians. Yes. Written to Jewish Christians, not Jews. Jewish Christians. I'm still not seeing your point, Levi. Maybe it's just misunderstanding. Didn't they already understand that the law was no longer valid, and thus neither was circumcision? Well, that's what they lived under before, but that is it was a radical change. Maybe you ought to do that and clear something up and tell me what I taught wrong in chapter 2. they understood the law was not valid, but the point is that I'm just gonna let you explain your point.
Hello.
So did I teach something that was wrong, Levi, or I'm not understanding your point?
All right. What my point is, CJ, is that Romans is written to Jew and Gentile Christians.
Right,
Chapter 2 is smack dab in the middle of a rebuke to Jewish Christians. And it's about the validity of the law.
right,
Okay. And what we're dealing with in 17 through the end of the chapter of chapter 2 is not necessarily a continuation of the thought of verse 1. It's a different paragraph, in other words. When
right.
when you look at this, behold, thou art called a Jew and restest in the law and makest thy boast of God. So we're directly addressing Jewish Christians.
Right,
You know his will and approve the things that are more excellent, being instructed out of the law. You are confident that you are yourself a guide of the blind, a light of them which are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of babes, which has a form of knowledge and of the truth in the law. You therefore which teach another, do you not teach yourself? You that preach a man should not steal, do you steal? You that say a man should not commit adultery, don't you commit adultery? See, when they left the law of Moses by becoming Christians, they broke the law. They are guilty of the law of Moses. So here they are trying to teach Jewish or the Gentile Christians to hold to the rudiments of the Jewish faith.
right.
And Paul is chastising them for holding on to these invalid rudiments. Not, of course, that we shouldn't suddenly be after idols or committing adultery, etc. But when they broke the law, when they became Christians, they committed adultery in the eyes of Moses' law. What was God saying to Israel all this time when they kept pursuing after idols? You are fornicating, you are adulterers, you are adulteresses. Come back to me, right?
Right,
You were committing spiritual adultery. How about when when they left the law, they stole. They took from God, as it were, according to the law of Moses, they took themselves away from God, according to the law of Moses. We
right.
know that they didn't because they went to the new law, which was they went to God and devoted themselves to God. But the
So,
idea that Paul is conveying here is that when they left the law of Moses to become children of God under the new covenant, they became guilty of all that was under that old law. And yet they're still trying to teach the Gentiles to hold to that invalid covenant through circumcision. This is directly to Judaizer teachers that we find out in Acts that Paul had a lot of trouble with. Remember, he's writing to Rome many years after the advent of the church.
right.
These people, these Jewish Christians, should have known better. They've had plenty of time to get to understand this point, and yet here they are still teaching that the law of Moses is valid. And that's not what it is at all. It's no longer valid.
So what was my error?
Basically what it was is that you weren't bringing out that depth. That's all I was trying to get you to do, is bring out that depth.
Okay.
You see, if you can't bring out that depth, we don't understand that, because we're 2,000 years removed from that problem. We don't have people today in the church that are teaching that we need to hold to the covenants of Moses.
Right.
So when we read the book of Romans, we need to understand what is going on in the church to be able to get the depth of what Paul is trying to say.
Yeah.
Circumcision, he says, it's not valid. Physical circumcision. Let me ask you this. I think you and I have talked about this before. Was circumcision of the old law, or was it prior to the old law? Prior, because it was given to who?
Abraham.
And what was it a sign of?
His covenant.
It was a sign of the Abrahamic covenant, but what was the covenant? What did that covenant involve? Do you remember?
I don't understand.
What was the covenant of Abraham?
Land nation.
And blessing, right?
Blessing, right?
Okay. So, as circumcised Jews, that circumcision gave them, what is it? Gave them, why am I fumbling with this? Access to that covenant. Gave them the nation. Night, night. Cuteness overload. Where's your sleep tight? Where's your sleep tight? You forgot the sleep tight. Sleep tight. Where's your, now what's next? No. You want to start over again? Start over again. What's the first thing? You're fumbling too. Give me a guess. What do you say? Night, night. Night. Sweet dreams. Don't stand behind me. Come on up over here where I can see you. You're hurting my neck. Love you. Come on, you know the routine. Peaceful rest. Peaceful rest. God bless. Good night, sweetie.
Night.
Okay, so because they were circumcised, they were part of Abraham's covenant.
Right.
Which means they were part of the nation of Israel. They were children of Abraham.
Right.
Circumcision was then carried over into the old law.
Right.
As, again, a symbol of the blessing, the land nation blessing. What did it profit?
Well, are you talking about now in Christ?
In the old under the old law, what did it profit? What
Well,
what you know,
brought you into the Abrahamic covenant.
and it also brought you into a relationship with God,
Right?
right? Now, because verse 25 of Romans chapter 2, circumcision truly did profit, but only if you kept the whole law.
Right.
But now look at in verse 25, what are the Jews? What are the Jewish Christians?
Uncircumcision. Because you didn't keep the covenant.
They broke the law, didn't they? They
Right?
left the law of Moses.
I didn't bring that out like I should have. Thank you.
So since they left the law of Moses, they were guilty of breaking the law. And
Right.
therefore circumcision no longer profited them. And thus, like you said in your teaching, it's not any longer necessary for the physical circumcision. It's the inward circumcision.
And there's a whole chapter on that in Acts 15. They come together and have to hash that out again.
And am I not correct in thinking that there was possibly, is it Colossians 4? 3 or 4, where Paul says, am I not a Jew? Am I not a Benjamin? I'm of the tribe of Benjamin. And he goes through and he talks about how he had all this going for him as a Jew.
Right.
And I know that Sam brought that up in one of his comments, but then, like you said, he changes focus and he says, what then is the advantage of the Jew? There isn't any advantage to being a Jew. There is none. None, really, right? Except that you know God.
Right.
Except that you have had the holy oracles, so you've had some teaching as to the will of God as it was. That's a prophet, isn't it?
Right.
And so he doesn't leave them desolate, but he chastises them for putting their faith in the Abrahamic, or rather in the Mosaical covenant, which is no longer valid. And he chastises them for trying to make the Gentiles who are faithful to the Lord keep the rudiments of the Mosaical law. And remember Acts chapter 15, what were the Gentiles required to do? Abstain from things offered to idols.
Right. Things strangled.
And from fornication.
Right. Well,
that's all that was necessary, right?
Right. Well, I appreciate you bringing that out better than I did. And so next week we will start in verse 9 and go through, I don't know, we'll see.
I don't think you'll find that in there.
We'll start at verse 9. How about that? Thank you all.
Somewhere in the Bible.
Somewhere in the good book, there is a verse 9 and it goes, I don't know.
Well, thank you all for joining us. And remember, tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., I plan to be on preaching about, what did I title it? Philosophy and Empty Deceit. Thank you all for joining.
I'll get out of here. Y'all have a wonderful evening. I'll see you then.
I appreciate Levi coming on, setting me straight. Remember, here at CEM, we want to do three things. We want to glorify God, we want to edify the saints, and we want to answer any spiritual questions you may have. Thank you all for joining, and God bless.